strive together for the acquisition of knowledge. May the knowledge and wisdom that we acquire be effective and illuminative. May there be no dissension or disharmony between us. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishna Jagadgurum Padapadame Trayo Shritva Pranami Muhuram Namah Shri Yadirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhasvarupaya Samine Tapane. We're extremely delighted that we have Dr. V.N. Gangadharan. He is well known in the field of consciousness studies, pranayama, and he was the director of the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences at Bangalore. Ashtanga Yoga has 8 limbs, as everybody knows, but some of the limbs are less discussed than the others. We begin, usually everybody in yoga, with asana and dhyana. But asana and dhyana are slightly advanced. We have pranayama, which is very less discussed. And Dr. Gangadhar is an expert in this, in a sense, because he has done a lot of researches, and scientific basis of pranayama has been hugely discussed by him in the literature. So we welcome you, sir, as the inaugurator of this 15-day webinar series. Pranayama, unfortunately, has been taken to be a breathing exercise, and the word prana having been translated by the English people as breath. Swami Vivekananda, his famous Raja Yoga lecture, said, the translator makes a mistake in taking to be only breath. Prana is a vast subject, and akasha and prana, two the elements of which the whole universe is composed. Vivekananda said, prana vibrates in akasha, the matter is produced. Since it is matter on the one hand, force and energy on the other hand, and the interrelation between akasha and the prana, both of them ultimately getting dissolved in mahat, and above that is the prakriti and the purusha, is the Vedantic wisdom, which Swami Vivekananda has elaborately spoken about. So here we have Dr. Gangadhar to discuss the modern aspects of the pranayama and the scientific basis. I request from Vidya Pradhananda, the convener of the seminar, to briefly introduce the speaker.
Good evening, Dr. Gangadhar and all the participants who have registered in this webinar series. We have been conducting this webinar for the last 3 years on different aspects of yoga, and the Inter-University Center for Yogic Sciences, Bangalore, has been the sponsoring body.
This time there has been a huge response. More than 300 people have shown interest. Let us see how we join.
So we are really happy and delighted and grateful that Dr. B.N. Gangadhar has agreed to be the inaugural speaker of this webinar series. Dr. Gangadhar is presently with the National Medical Commission. He has been serving as the director of NIMHANS since 2016 and professor of psychiatry also. Dr. Gangadhar completed his MBBS in 1978, his MD in psychiatry in 1981, and DSc from S. Vyasa University for his research work on yoga and mental health. He served as the Honorary Dean of Life Sciences at S. Vyasa Yoga University. He was also the adjunct faculty on consciousness at National Institute of Advanced Studies. He was the president of the Indian Psychiatric Society Karnataka chapter and also visiting fellow at IBRO, Vienna, Austria. He is the expert. He is on the expert committee of DST and National Ayush Committee for Integrative Medicine. He is also the recipient of the Sir C.V. Raman Award and Doctor's Day Award from the Government of Karnataka. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Can I take over?
You will speak on the scientific basis of pranayama.
Yeah,
Okay. So please.
I'll also be sharing some slides.
Over to you. Yes.
As the thing is going on, I have the honor of having three of my senior colleagues from the National Medical Commission. We have had a day-long meeting here. It just got over. And Dr. Vijay Oza is the president of the PG Education Board. Dr. Aruna Manikar, president of the UG Education Board. And Dr. Vijayendra Kumar is the member of the UG Education Board. We have had a meeting today, almost a day long, along with the faculty from the National Law School, Bangalore, to iron out several issues related to the regulations of the National Medical Commission. So we just finished the meeting, and it's my luck that I also have these colleagues with me in this hall where this video conference is going on.
So welcome to all of them.
Yeah, they are not seen in the camera. They are all saying hello to you, sir. They are giving the pranams to you. They are with me here. So in this regard, I must also thank you for considering me to be the person to inaugurate this series of activities, the webinar related education on pranayama. And like you rightly said, having been trained in Western science, my understanding of pranayama also comes from the roots of Western understanding of pranayama. And for whatever may be the reason, the attachment to research on yoga, pranayama, and its relationship to medical applications and the science behind it has been something that I have indulged in less than last 2 decades. From whatever the Western literature on the science of pranayama had talked about, and only more recently, after having heard some eminent speakers' lectures on the Vedantic aspects and the spiritual aspects of yoga and pranayama, I can claim that I have learned much more than what I used to be indulging in as part of the science of these things. And more so, Swamiji had visited Nimhans and had given a talk. So there are many other opportunities where I was able to update my knowledge on this. So, however, when we are talking of the science of pranayama, being a biologist, a medical scientist, I can only think of the biological applications, biological components of the science of pranayama, and how I have used it in health. While I agree that the research that has been conducted elsewhere and research available is so vast, and understanding from the Vedantic perspective, or whatever we may call as our traditional learning of pranayama, has been a lot different. Let's see how we can blend these two in the process of this talk. So, having said this, let me also wish all the listeners on this webinar a very, very happy International Day of Yoga, which is going to come in the next 3 weeks. This is in the month of June, it is going to be held. And it is very apt that the group is conducting a webinar lasting for 2 weeks as a preparation to celebrate the International Day of Yoga. And of course, once Yoga Day was authenticated by the UN, world over, people began to do yoga in masses. People assembled in different places, not in tens or hundreds, not even in thousands, in tens of thousands. And some reason or other, as the word would say, to connect. Yoga indeed connected people. Although from a philosophical perspective, from a spiritual perspective, we would say it would connect my personal consciousness with the cosmic consciousness as a part of my transcendence upwards. If I continue to do the sadhana of yoga, and this connection obviously spread across people got connected world over. Wherever the sun entered that land, at 7 o'clock, everyone did namaskaram to the Lord Sun on that day of 21st June, as part of the International Day of Yoga, assembling in large masses across faiths that they were practicing, across the country where this was accepted or not, across the cultures where they were abiding by sun salutations or not. Nonetheless, yoga bound them together, connected them together, as the word yuj means to connect. And this strength of yoga comes from many elements of yoga which we have been trying to practice, starting from the yama, niyama, asana, and now the pranayama, to which we are alluding to in this our inaugural hour of this webinar, discussing about the pranayama. So, International Day of Yoga needs a mention in this lecture related to pranayama, because it is yoga which brought pranayama into light. Much research on yoga had been initiated, and more recently, the research on pranayama has been accumulating. Although, as a part of introduction, few things were said about save time. I had made a small slide which would give me what is the background from which I have come as a speaker in this program. So, what drove me to research into yoga, pranayama, etc.? It is said that Sushruta Samhita, it says, learning from just one single source of knowledge for medical practice is perhaps insufficient. One has to accumulate knowledge to be a good healer from different sources and different other systems, so that he or she who is the health provider would be a more comprehensive health provider. In this context, whatever I had learned during my MBBS days, I thought of seeking knowledge from other traditional sources. Yoga was one of them. I'm sure there are many other sources from where a good physician perhaps has to acquire knowledge. Essentially, as what we have been saying, ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. So the same truth from different sources, the same intention of getting good health to the person, but pulling all information, all knowledge from different sources ought to happen. And so I, with a lot of my colleagues here who were keenly interested, added yoga into our clinical practice. And that's how the research and search for the knowledge in respect to pranayama began. I agree that the understanding of prana as a breath is a very, very concrete understanding. I'm sure we have to see it in a more spiritual perspective, and the prana would mean not just breath in a physical sense, but also something that drives vitality, that is something all pervading, and part of it also is there in me. And if you understand this, the researchers are focused on the relationship to breath as a manifestation of prana. And so slow breathing, bellow breathing, so many words have come. But what is most important when it comes to yogic applications of pranayama is, whatever you are doing, do it with as much mindfulness as possible, with full control at your end, at the practitioner's end, and paying attention to the whole process and keeping in mind that what I'm doing is something that of a spiritual sadhana that has to be done to get the best benefit of pranayama, but nonetheless, total mindfulness is the central issue which I have been talking about in my clinical service, teaching to the students, and also helping the patients to practice this pranayama. Of course, in a very objective sense, Sage Patanjali also talks about control over the shwasa and prashwasa, inhale and exhale, as and also stopping it totally is the pranayama. In the aphorism in the Patanjali, he has said that this is a cycle that goes on. And these cycles, breaking or stopping this cycle. Stopping is something that it is the ultimate, in the sense the best sadhaka would be able to do it, stopping at will, but it is not something that we usually talk about when it comes to clinical practice though. So, some more understanding of pranayama is available in the literature, which from Patanjali itself, we talk about what it is to be able to breathe out, take it inside and hold it on. And these cycles are related, are also determined by many other components. That is, we talk about the depth of such breathing in or breathing out, the duration for which we do this procedure, and the frequency with which we do. And we also talk about these elements are put together to describe whether the pranayama is dirgha or sukshma, subtle. So this aphorism gives a little more description of what we call as components of pranayama, which the Hatha Yoga talks about rechaka, puraka, and kumbhaka. Kumbhaka also has been expanded as bahya kumbhaka and antar kumbhaka. When I exhale and hold on, or when I inhale and hold on, these have also been described. So several practical applications of these in our traditional literature are available, and the same decide on the what we may call as it is a dirgha or a sukshma pranayama. So there is also, of course, a fourth dimension of pranayama which has been talked about, not just breathing out, breathing in and holding on, making the whole cycle still at will, which is something only the most accomplished sadhakas would be encouraged to do, and it is not something that has been much researched at this point of time. So what does the yoga, the pranayama accomplish? What does it give it to me? One of them is that it removes all the obstacles for the inner illumination. Would we say that it is something like tamasoma jyotirgamaya? Would it be something equivalent to that? But it's true that those who have practiced yoga and pranayama very consistently with devotion and with that mindfulness are able to introspect better and be able to give knowledge even better to the other people. It, of course, practice of pranayama helps a person to prepare oneself for the next steps of the yoga sadhana, which includes dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So, and of course, pratyahara as well. So it prepares an individual for the Antaranga Yoga. Until now, we have been doing the Bahiranga Yoga, and these mastery over pranayama is the good step with which I can start the other processes of Antaranga Yoga, which includes meditation, among which the concentration is the first one to start about. This is about Patanjali. But of course, pranayama has been alluded to in other texts as well, much before Patanjali as well. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita himself, the Lord says the whole process of taking out is a part of a yajna which a person offers as a sacrifice to me. So the Lord says every act, if it is done mindfully, with a mind kept on me, would be a yajna which an individual is doing. And this is the description of the pranayama in Bhagavad Gita. There are, of course, other descriptions as well. Adi Shankara, as we know, has given a even more thoughtful spiritual description, that feeling that I am one with the rest of the consciousness outside, feeling that I am the Brahman, and that taking the breath in is what I would be considering myself as. I'm giving the breath out is I'm letting go the current physical universe. So this thought has to pervade in me when I'm continuing to practice pranayama in a spiritual sense. While all these descriptions and the way of practices of pranayama have been talked about, many procedures have cropped up in those sadhakas who are doing it earlier, and the researchers which have translated the pranayama procedures into clinical applications or for research. The central issue is being mindful. I keep repeating it, although this might sound sometimes senseless, but it is important that the entire process of pranayama, a person keeps his mind focused on the process. And of course, one of the procedures which people have been talking about is most commonly the exhalation process is something that is longer than the inhalation, and holding on is even longer than both of them. So the ratio they have described, and there are different yoga practices, pranayama practices have different ratios. Different schools of thought have this variation, but it is suffice to say inhalation will be the fastest and holding on will be the longest part of the pranayama, and the exhalation comes in between. Then, of course, more research has happened on uninostril breathing and the alternate nostril breathing. There are descriptions about breathing through the mouth, we call as Shitali pranayama and Shitkari pranayama. Different descriptions have come. When I am doing the pranayama, I also chant, either I would say Om or Brahmari for that matter. This also has been put into practice and has been researched on. In fact, some of these I have put as the first top 3 have been researched extensively in terms of biology, autonomic systems, and so on and so forth. Then we have the bellow breathing with the movement in the limbs. And some also say that while doing the yogasanas, different steps of reaching an asana, one has to synchronize with a given breathing process of taking in and leaving out. So together, there are many procedures which have been put to application. And of course, benefits of pranayama have been studied in the healthy and in the ill as well. So when research is applied to the other individuals, pranayama is applied as a research process in the other individuals, there are several challenges which we encounter. The first thing is when I say pranayama causes XYZ change, I am assuming that all pranayamas are same. In fact, all pranayamas are not same. And this is something that I want to caution if any of the researchers in pranayama have been listening to it. It's true that we have to use a specific pranayama rather than saying pranayamas produce. It is something like saying yoga produces improvement in a condition XYZ. What type of yoga, which asana is something that researchers want to hear about, because any replication study, the procedure has to be same to be able to replicate a given finding. So there are multiple variables in each pranayama. I already mentioned a few of them: the length, the time at which you are practicing, the length of its practice, whether you are recording any variable during the pranayama or after the pranayama practice, how many minutes, hours after the pranayama practice. There are many associated procedures which are preparatory to pranayama. Some of them teach different yogasanas before participating, making the person participate in pranayama. So what are those preparatory procedures which have an influence or no influence? We have really not carefully examined. Asana, pranayama, and dhyana usually form a package of a yoga module which is taught to a given individual. And to separate out the effects of pranayama between the three on a physical variable that you are measuring is yet another challenge. So, yet research has been going on. What is important is, in the last 10 years, there has been a steep rise in the research output on pranayama. When I looked at a search for word pranayama in the PubMed, one of the most commonly used literature search for medical scientists, there were 443 lists, of which most came in the last 1 decade. So interest in research in pranayama has increased and has attracted a lot of research. And there have been different components of pranayama which have been examined. And of course, since it is breathing, the first part of the breathing is through the nasal passages. And people looked at what are the symptoms related to nasal passages which are alleviated. For example, chronic rhinosinusitis gets benefit from practicing of pranayama. And they went on to look at the biology of what is the process that can happen, the mechanoreceptors of those membranes which are covering the olfactory bulb, and also the mucociliary clearance mechanism which is operating and which gets better over the course of practice of pranayama. The biological mechanisms and the related clinical effects have been examined. And they have found that practice of pranayama is beneficial. Amongst the other applications of pranayama is to look at whether pranayama improves stress. In fact, there are good evidence that pranayama practices lower stress. And as an indicator of lowering of the stress, people looked at the heart rate variability, which is one commonly researched autonomic parameter. And they were able to demonstrate that the heart rate variability increases with the practice of pranayama. This is one example of a what we call as frequency time domain based heart rate variability measure. Root mean square of successive standard deviations, so which indicates that RR interval is variable with the practice of pranayama, which is an indicator of healthy lung, healthy heart, and also reduced stress. This has been replicated by many people. In fact, the literature is abound with the autonomic and particularly HRV related work in pranayama, not just in Brahmari. Many other pranayamas, the research has focused on the heart rate variability effects. Then the brain. Cerebrovascular effects of pranayama have been examined by many means, starting from the Doppler studies to studies which look at oxyhemoglobin content using functional near-infrared spectroscopy, to more recently functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, about which the last part of it will come towards the end. But the cerebrovascular effects, when one looks at, there are differential effects of the pranayamas on the variables which we are examining. For example, Bhastrika and the Kumbhaka pranayamas give opposite results with respect to the mean flow velocity, end diastolic velocity, and the peak systolic velocity. These become different from baseline to the practice. In Bhastrika versus Kumbhaka, they're different. And this is another reason why I want people to remember that all pranayamas are not same. You have to mention which pranayama brought which effect. Likewise, you have the uninostril and right and left, all different. The effects are different. And I don't want to go into the details of this work done by one of my colleagues at NIMHANS, Dr. Hemant Bhargav, which he has shown right versus left uninostril breathing practices have a differential effect in neurophysiologically, demonstrated by different approaches that he has examined. And likewise, you have effects of several other variables which are impacting on the clinical or the biological variable you are measuring. In fact, this has prompted one of the authors to very recently write that how different definitions have been given for a procedure of pranayama in different texts, and how the PubMed published literature also differs across study to study, which makes the comparability of the studies become very difficult. For example, this author looked at different definitions of Kapalabhati, Brahmari, and Bhastrika in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Giranda Samhita, and the traditional texts. And people who have researched on these three types of pranayama procedures, although Kapalabhati is not traditionally called as a pranayama, but people have included in pranayama researchers, as they believe that any breathing research on traditional texts is called as a pranayama research. So these require standardizing these definitions to be able to have good confirmatory studies. More than 15 different variables for each of the procedures have been talked about, and how we are going to finally come up with good guidelines which can be adopted for purposes of research. Depth of breathing, as I mentioned earlier, the posture in which I am doing, the duration for which I have practiced, the frequency, the time of the day, and then the whole lot of as many as about 17 variables have been talked about which influence. So we need to pay attention when interpreting results which have come out from the researchers on different aspects of pranayama. One of them is the mechanoreceptors in the nasal mucosal membrane. Very interesting study. While breathing is through the nose, slow breathing, and the same rates of breathing, if I do it with the mouth, will I get the same benefit? Is the benefit of the pranayama through the nasal mechanoreceptors. It has been very well demonstrated, and the author found nasal breathing produces a more impacting, more profound changes in the EEG, theta, and the delta waves. Actually, the power increases, indicating the individual's brain is calmer than otherwise. If you do it out of the mouth, the effects are different. And this again confirms the fact that the nasal breathing for purposes of pranayama have the best benefits, like Shitkari and Shitali pranayama, which use the mouth, would have perhaps the differential effects. So the route through which I practice the pranayama makes another impact. We talk of nasal, since I mentioned about the nasal breath. In healthy systems also, there is a nasal cycle people have talked about. There are right and the left cyclically become either congested, partially patent, totally patent. And this would be smoothened out by the practices of yoga, and the uninostril breathing on the congested side would increase the nitric oxide production in that nasal passage, which perhaps have had an impact on the vasodilatation effects. People have also talked about Brahmari and Om chanting produce in both the nostrils the same effect of nitrous oxide increases. Eventually, what these things will translate into clinical practice is a study that we still have to address in the days to come. More importantly, amongst the practices is my interest on this pranayama or the Om meditation or chanting, the research about which I'll come to towards the end of this talk. So when you talk of pranava, the Patanjali has described pranava focusing on Om chanting silently, and they also talk about chanting it loudly and also focusing it on the effects of loud chanting of Om, Udgita Pranayam. These two are different, although most people talk of Om meditation means focusing on the Om mentally or focusing on the Om sound I'm hearing from outside. Not many have looked at chanting of Om and focusing on the process of chanting of Om and its physiological effects. Of course, the various Upanishads have given different descriptions on Om, as I've heard this talk on Mandukya Upanishad by Swamiji, which describes various components of the Om, the syllable of Om, and how it generates and what are its impact. And of course, one should meditate on this syllable. The Chandogya Upanishad says, of course, the Lord says, I am the syllable of Om itself. As we can see, Om has such a divine position in our learning. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa says, follow the trail of Om, you attain the Brahmanhood. So my Atma Sakshatkara will be complete only when I continue to meditate and practice and chant Om as spiritually best possible. A very good research review is available in the International Journal of Yoga about a decade ago on this subject. I would encourage people who are interested in research on this subject to refer to this particular review article. Of course, pranayama, focusing on Om sound, Om chanting mentally was the research that this author has done. And very importantly, in pregnant women, the person demonstrated that the maternal and fetal heart rates dropped while practicing pranayama. And the mothers experienced more fetal movements in the makara chanting phase of the chanting of pranava. So it's very interesting that Om, either chanting or focusing on the Om as a pranava, has a impact not just on the individual, healthy individual, but also on the individual to be coming out to life from the mother's womb, the fetus. Om-related pranayama effects have been linked to the role of vagal feedback, effect on the vagal nerve while chanting Om. And in fact, several review articles have come up with this. Pranayama, different practices of pranayama having had an impact on stimulating the vagal afferents, taking vagal stimulation to the brain, and then on producing several other neuro-physiological effects, which is almost similar to what we get from an exogenous vagal nerve stimulation used for treating epilepsy or treating depression, which is now coming to the market though. So I will be referring to this last part of the work on Om. In fact, Om research and Om practice drew the attention of Time magazine as a head cover, frontline, an entire supplement talking about just say Om. An article also came up. Om produces a sense of vibration around my ears when I'm chanting Om loudly, focusing my attention on these vibrations, which are transmitted to the brain by the posterior auricular branch of the vagus nerve. And also, there are other vibrations in the lung and larynx. Again, the same vagus nerve conducts the message to the brain. In fact, vagus nerve, 80% of its business is to pick up signals from different parts of myself in the body, the two internal organs, helping me to be interoceptive better, take the signal to the brain. And so most practices of yoga, which includes the bandhas, which again make movements in the abdominal cavity, and the chest, slow breathing, slowly expanding, bellow breathing, again quickly expanding, the Kapalabhati, quick exhalations. Most of these will stimulate the vagus afferents, take the message to the brain. And in fact, the Om chanting, the posterior auricular nerve stimulation by way of the vibrations that you experience, take this message to the brain, leading to whitening of the limbic gray matter, and of course, in effect, producing a feeling of calmness. And this limbic region inhibition that the vagus nerve, vagal afferents produce by way of Om chanting, external vagal nerve stimulation also has a similar effect on lowering the limbic gray matter functioning, demonstrated by functional magnetic resonance imaging studies. This was a work which was done almost a decade ago, and very recently another colleague of mine has confirmed almost similar findings, if not in all the centers. The yellow parts of the functional magnetic resonance imaging are the ones where the limbic gray matter became actually deactivated. The activation was less in these areas, and these are the areas which, when active, produce a lot of emotional upheaval. And Om, while chanting Om, these are the centers which actually became quietened. While a person did not chant Om, the last quadrant A, no such effect was seen. The gray matter, no, in the limbic gray matter, no change in the activation or deactivation happened, while chanting Om in different gray matters, particularly the cingulum, which we recently confirmed in another Om chanting fMRI experiment, disinhibition or inhibition or deactivation actually was possible and was demonstrated. And elsewhere, people have found exogenous vagal nerve stimulation in an fMRI experiment produce deactivation in similar areas. So Om chanting has a neurophysiological effect of quietening my emotions through quietening the limbic system, and a cascade of events that follow after that. So having said the neurobiological effects of yoga, pranayama in particular, and many other physiological effects that have been described, put to use in clinical practice, in mental health, we need to also keep in mind that slow breathing has a feedback mechanism which we have exploited in getting these persons better. Emotions, as we know, they control breathing. My breathing rates increase when I am anxious, when I become angry, when I become agitated. And of course, the calming of these emotions is with that sigh of relief, slowing the respiration rates. And if emotions can influence breathing rates, why not breathing rates in reverse influence emotions? This is the principle which has been used. You deliberately, by way of concentration with focus, willfully slow the breathing. And if you are able to achieve that slow breathing to the rates well below your usual breathing rates, you have helped your brain to learn not to become excited, not to become agitated, and the emotions get better, and the stress effect and the resilience improves. And this is the therapeutic part of pranayama. which we have exploited in clinical applications. So, towards the end of my talk, the focus should be on how to integrate this one simple procedure, which is again not what one would say faith related. One could be translating it into clinical practice, and to be able to give this in clinical applications, we have to look at good clinical trials in its practice. What is the ethics involved in that, adverse effects, and many other components, including how many, how often, when, which yoga practice. These standardizations again become important. And for that, we need to build a very good research database. And if we are able to do this, the Sushrutas shloka, which I talked about, we draw knowledge from this aspect of spiritual research to the bedside clinical work, and this pluralistic education could be beneficial to enrich our clinical practice. So I stop here. Mata Saraswati gave me all this wisdom. I bow to her. I thank each one of you who participated in this talk. Much of the work on yoga and pranayama, which I did, was in our yoga center. Now it has become the Department of Integrative Medicine, where I also happen to be the emeritus professor. So here is my email. Those of you who want to send any queries at the end of the talk, you could send it to me. Since 1 hour was the time slot, I have completed my talk. I thank Swamiji for letting me in for this talk. Thank you, sir, and thank each one of the participants on this issue. Thank you very much.
We can take a couple of questions. We have 5-10 minutes more. If somebody has a question, please put it in the chat box. If any of the participants has a question, please write it in the chat box.
I'll stop sharing the slides.
Yeah.
Let me look at the chat box. Till now, there are no questions. So it looks like questions may be sent on the email later.
Yeah. Just we have 5 minutes more. We can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We have.
Hi, can I ask my question?
Yeah, please.
Yes, madam.
Namaste, sir. Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity to see you a second time in a row this year. I was a participant at the integrative workshop also for basics of yoga therapy as a psychologist at the IMD department. I've been very inspired with your work, and I was putting an article together as a psychologist, having studied mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. When I look at our traditional works, and because I was anchored into spirituality much before psychology happened in my life, it's been a natural integration at a level of practice. Now, however, I'm trying to put things together at a scale. I need inputs from mentors like you when I'm putting this, when I'm looking at Ashtanga yoga, and I'm looking at MBCT or MBSR. Would it be right to say that they are touching upon pratyahara and not necessarily the other limbs? When we talk about the Western concept of mindfulness-based therapies, I feel that they are mostly operating within the realm of pratyahara.
Yeah, you could well be true. It's known that each element has its own role to play in terms of getting that person better. The teaching in our traditional way of healing involves putting all components together. Just as much as you prepare your curry, putting so many ingredients into that curry, whereas there they would put only one of the ingredients. Same is the case with your medicine. The rasayana of the Ayurveda will have many ingredients, which I don't know which one of them is the issue. Whereas we talk in allopathic medicine, one molecule. So there is a way of approach. Two are different, reductionistic versus global. So, which is again elucidated in your two applications, which you talked about, the yogic concept of therapy versus the Western concept of therapy. They're going to be different. understanding are different, the style in which, but nonetheless, if either of these two are working or both of them are working as well, I think we should allow people to continue what is the best result that they're getting. I agree with you that from our concepts in our country, yoga has been a culturally accepted mode of practice, and it is more holistic. Continue to use it and get the best benefits from your clients.
May I have an input? Mindfulness is not pratyahara.
Mindfulness alone is not right.
Pratyahara is withdrawal. Mindfulness says don't withdraw, allow things to happen, just see as a witness. It's a kind of witness consciousness which has been spoken of in the Upanishads, rather than withdrawal spoken of in the Yoga Sutras.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you for the insight.
So there are so many questions now in the chat box.
So Swamiji, if you were to equate it to the Ashtanga 8 limbs, which one would you say mindfulness is more connected to?
All.
So mindfulness from the Ashtanga Yoga, reaching the state of the Anahata. So the Kundalini, you have to go from the Kundalini point of view, which Swami Vivekananda speaks about as Raja Yoga, punching Patanjali's yoga with the Tantra's Kundalini. If the Kundalini rises the Anahata, you have a complete consciousness that you are not the body-mind complex anymore. You are a spirit living in the body. And you are apart from all this. Mindfulness means you are apart from all this. You are just seeing the whole operation of Prakriti. At the moment, yoga says you are part of Prakriti and you are struggling to get out of Prakriti. That is yoga. Purusha Prakriti Viveka. Now, when you reach the Anahata, you realize automatically that you are not part of Prakriti anymore. So you are just the spirit who are in the body, and you can see the whole thing as a kind of witness. That mindfulness begins with that. And therefore, the present word which is used by people with a heartfulness, not mindfulness. Reach the heart. So
that's a good one.
You can pick up some of them, Dr. Gangadhar, from the chat.
And no, nothing has come, sir. No chat box questions. Let me see. Yeah, there are. No, sir. Unless any of you, maybe there isn't any. Oh, there are some questions. You are right. I'm sorry, I missed out. Yeah, this question you already answered. Link between breathing and mind control. You did allude to. Is there any adverse effect of Om chanting known patient of hypertension? I have not heard of anything. In fact, there are studies which have shown that chanting Om and Pranava, Dhyana, Pranava meditation is supposed to actually lower the blood pressure. That seems to be some finding that most people have talked about. Although from a case to case, we have to take a call rather than generalizing it, whether hypertension is a contraindication for Om chanting.
One adverse effect which has been spoken of is the meditation on the Ajna Chakra, in between the eyebrows. So people are told not to do this. That has an adverse effect, unless you are extremely pure and advanced.
Yeah. How long one has to practice pranayama every day? I'm not aware if there is any hard and fast rule on this thing. Sadhakas would keep doing it 24/7, and we as ordinary mortals would probably have to do it for maybe a couple of less than half an hour, depending upon how much we are able to devote our time to. But the intent should be clear, and all through the procedure, we remain focused on the procedure that what we are doing. Chanting Om and other Saraswati mantras, is there any difference? I do not have a knowledge on this aspect. I will perhaps not venture answering this particular question. Dr. Biswajit Basu, Dr. Nikhil has asked this question. Is there any adverse effects of Brahmari chanting or known patient in HTN, which again goes the whole thing? I'm not aware. If you have come across anything, please give a feedback and we need to look at it. In fact, we in the integrative medicine department are carefully documenting any such adverse event that occurred during the practice of any of the yoga procedures. to be able to develop a compendium as to what are the adverse effects and what should or should not be done. Although most of us keep saying or keep hearing in the past that is a very safe practices that we need to be using it. But how safe it is for everyone or is it unsafe to any one of the individuals is something that we need to develop a record base. I think we have started doing that at this point of time. What is the relationship between deep breathing and pranayama? Yeah, the depth of breathing I mentioned in one of the slides is one of the components of pranayama, and deep breathing itself is not equals to pranayama. Is there any adverse effect of home chanting in known patient? I think this question has repeated often. I think I'm sure people may be concerned. I'm not sure if there's any event that has happened. Kindly let me know. Is there a systematic review, meta-analysis of science of pranayama substantiate the evidence? There are some narrative reviews and review articles have come up. I am not in a position to, at this point of time, give you the information here right now, but some of which have been used in my talk. I'm sure you could perhaps refer to the slides if you have it in the references. One or two of them are there, but there are several review articles that have come up and several narrative reviews have come up. Whether a meta-analysis has come, I need to have a look at it. Immediately, I won't be able to answer this question. Yeah. Thank you for the last message was just thanking us, and I don't see any other message after that. Share the PPT. PPT, I'm sure, is by now you would have already had it with you because it was presented online. I'm sure you have got it with you.
Talk us on the YouTube.
Whether pranayama has been useful in eliminating addictions. Eliminating addiction has been a great challenge, and I don't think much of us have had a success with any intervention in that toto for that matter. But there are several studies which have shown yoga applications and pranayama have reduced methadone use when individuals with practice of opiate addiction. We have also found practice of Sudarshana Kriya made the individuals become less depressed in the process of treatment that they were going on. More work we need to do. How much of continued practice there are people able to abstain from the whole process. This work has yet to be done. We don't have a full-fledged data on this. Yeah, that's about it, sir. Fibromyalgia, they talked about who could not do Brahmari at all because, yeah, chanting Om, yeah. He had a splitting headache because, yeah, thank you, madam, for giving this information. I'll keep this in mind. Brahmari, he couldn't, but the Om chanting, he was able to do it without any difficulty. Nimans is standardizing research protocols. Yes, some of the research protocols we are standardizing, some of the modules of yoga we are doing it. I think pranayama standardization will take some time, I'm sure. Thank you for encouraging us to do this. Yeah, this is about it. Sir, I think this is about it. May I request you to send the email address, which I was there in the last slide. Slides would be available. If it is not there, the same email address what you have sent, sir, I will be able to send my presentations.
This will be on the website in the YouTube.
Sir, no problem.
On our website, so anybody can later also check.
Yeah.
ISH RKM dot. ISH Indian Spiritual Heritage, ISH RKM Very at the university. It is there in that.
I have chosen for presentation only some of the publications for illustration from freely available on the net, and some who have shared it with me. So there are no conflict of interest, and I think the authors whom I have cited in each of these slides will also have no objection in educating the listeners on this subject. Thank you, sir. With your permission, we should close.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram.